everyone, this is Syntax, and welcome to 10 ways to use triggers in Fortnite Creative. So yeah, let's just get right into it. So our first example is going to be a couple door tricks. I'm going to use triggers to unlock and open / close and lock the door. So as you can see, the door in front of us is clearly locked. So if I head toward it, it will unlock and open for me, and once I head past it, it will lock and close. So let's take a look at how this is done. So if you didn't know already, triggers link everything with channels. So I guess I'll explain really quickly what that is. But basically what you want to do is you want to grab your door and you're going to want to put a lock device on it. And I'm going to go ahead and customize it. Make sure it looks like this. We don't want it visible in game. So if it's not visible, the color doesn't matter. You want it to start locked. And here I have it unlocking and opening on the same channel. So for this, it's going to be channel 1. And I have it locking and closing on a different channel, which is channel 2. Now, the first trigger I obviously have on channel 1. So this is the channel that's going to be opening and unlocking the door. Now, if we look at the settings here, we have activating team, any, doesn't matter. And we're going to have a trigger by player, and everything else is off. So activate on game phase is going to be none. Times can trigger will be 1. Transit every X triggers will also be 1. Delay, none, none. Trigger sound disabled. Visual effects disabled, and visible in game is no. We don't want it to take damage while invisible, and we want it to enable on game start. And then we're going to go all the way to the bottom and say trigger or when trigger transmitted on channel 1. And it's the same exact settings for this trigger over here, except the bottom is going to be when triggered transmit on channel 2. So if you have this set up, you can actually have your door unlock and open when receiving from 1. Hence, when I walked here, it unlocked the door, and you can have it be locked when receiving from the corresponding channels. So yeah, let's get into the second example. So I actually lied. This is example 1 continued, but this is a cool trick you can use with triggers, and it's a spooky door trick. So if you're making a horror map or a haunted map and you want a door to kind of slam open and close while you're running toward it or while you're running down a hallway, you can set up triggers, and it should look something like this. So let's take a look at how this is done. So looking at our setup here, I have my lock device, same as the other lock device is set up, except this time I'm having it open and close and receiving from channel 3 and 4. I'm having it open on 3 and close on 4. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the exact same setup for the triggers, only this time I'm going to have them not be able to be triggered only once, but I'm going to have that be set to infinite. Okay, so I can run back and forth as many times as I want to. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to alternate triggers between the opening and closing of the door. You're just going to want to alternate them. So we'll go 3, 4, 3, 4, 3, 4. So every time I run past one of these triggers, it's going to either open or close. So here it's open, close, open, close, open, close. And if that's done correctly, your door should spam open and closed, like it's a spooky haunted door. So this time we're actually going on to look at example 2. So for this example, we're going to be looking at how you can use damaging triggers with opening doors. So here, if we come up here, we have our locked door. And let's say you're making a map where you have to hit the gnome in a certain spot. You don't want to hit him in the stomach. You have some text that says, okay, I want you to hit the gnome in the face and the door will open. Well, with this setup, we'll hit him in the face and the door will open. So yeah, let's take a look at how all this is done. So with this example, there's a pretty significant difference with the triggers. Most of the things are the same. The only difference is that instead of being triggered by player, you're turning that off. You're going to have it triggered by damage. Now make sure you go down and have receive damage when invisible. You want it to take damage, because otherwise you're not going to be able to have any input onto the trigger, and it won't work. So once again, make sure your doors are linked up. I have this on channel 5, so I'm going to have my lock door device also unlock and open and receive from channel 5. And yeah, that's how you can use damage with triggers in your map. So anyway, let's move on to example 3. So example 3 is actually triggers and sounds. So you can use triggers in your creative map to create certain sounds, either when you walk past them or when you damage them. We'll get that with example 4. But I have a trigger set up behind the board, and if I walk back there, I'll actually get a little sound that is triggered by me walking behind the door. So let's take a look at how this is done. So for this example, the trigger is set up exactly like the ones with the door, except this time we're going to be looking at our customizable speaker, our sound device. So you can choose the noise you want. I chose success 2. And you can choose the volume and the sound distance. This just is how far away you can hear it from, and this is how loud it's going to be, obviously. We want to ignore the trigger behavior, and we want to enable it during phase all. It actually, I guess if you want to enable something during pre-game or gameplay, It doesn't really matter. But for this purpose, it's going to be all. We don't want it to activate on hit, and we don't want to see it in game. And we want it to activate from the corresponding channel, obviously, with our trigger. So if you set all that up, you can have, you know, maybe you get into a section, you run past the trigger, and you get this sound in your creative map. So anyway, let's head on to the fourth example. So for this example, I'm going to be looking at damaging triggers and also applying that to having a sound. So let's say, again, you want to do something with the gnome. You don't have a gun this time, but maybe you want to like smack him. I don't know, but you don't want him to smack him anywhere. You want to smack him in the face. So once you hit him in the face, you will get a sound. Why I chose that sound, I don't know. But you know, hitting the gnome in the corresponding place you want them to hit it will create a sound, giving you an audio cue, letting you know you did something correctly. So let's take a look at how this is done. This example is actually fairly similar to the example with the damaging for opening the doors, only this time I'm linking up the channel with my sound device, and I'm letting a player know that they have done something correctly, or something incorrectly for that matter. So you could actually hook all of this up to channel 7 and have the door open and have it play a sound once you have hit the gnome. So yeah, let's go ahead and into the fifth example. So for this example, we're actually going to be looking at how triggers can be used, damaging triggers can be used to teleport the player. So let's say you're not a fan of unlocking and opening doors with damaging triggers, and you're not a fan of the sounds either. Well, you can have it so that if I hit this gnome in a designated spot, I can teleport to wherever I want them to. So as you can see, after I hit the gnome in the head, I teleported behind the sign. Of course, you can have this be a wall, you can have this be a different area, whatever you want. But anyway, let's take a look at how this is done. So with this particular example, you want to have the same setup you did for 7 and all the damaging triggers. You only want it to be activated once, hook up the channels. But for this one, we're going to be using the teleporter device. Now, teleporter device is interesting because there's a lot of options. Okay, so I'm going to have the teleporter group and teleporter target group not be designated. There's going to be none on that, okay? We want to enable it during all the phases and have all the teams. Depending on how many teams you have, you could have different teams teleport to different locations. Let's say you only wanted team 1 if they shot it. That way if team 2 shot it, it wouldn't do anything. But for this purpose, we'll have it all. We don't ever want to change the teleporter target, and we don't want it to be visual. I mean, I don't have any of this stuff visible, but you can obviously have it if you want to. This stuff isn't all that important. What's important is that we face them the way the teleporter is facing. That way you don't have them be misdirected. And we want to teleport. We want these channels to be linked up. Teleport to, which is the first option. As you can see here, the gnome is channel 8. So once we hit it, it's going to go to channel 8. So yeah, that's how you do that. Let's move on to the next example. So our sixth example is going to be looking at triggers with jump scares. Now this is the most complicated example in the video, so I'll be sure to explain this one as well as I can. But if we turn around back here, we see this empty room, and once we head into it, we will get jump scared, and it will disappear. And yeah, I guess let's get into how this works. So with this example, there's a lot going on, but I'll be sure to try and explain it as best I can. Basically, what you want to do is you want 2 identical rooms, ideally not on top of each other, but for this example, it worked out just fine. And in one of the rooms, you want to place a trigger, okay? This trigger is going to be the first thing that gets activated, and you want to have that on a channel. You only want to have it be activated once. Everything else is off. You can't see it in game. You want this to go on a channel. I have it set to channel 9. So if we head up here, you want to line a teleporter up in your second room as evenly as possible with this trigger, right? So I have it pretty evenly. And in your second room, you want what obviously you want the player to be jump scared with. So it could be a scarecrow, it could be something scary. I chose a gnome because we're just using gnomes for this particular video. But we're going to teleport to this when receiving from 9. Now, the 9 obviously is corresponding with the trigger we triggered down here. So once you hit this, you will teleport up top to here. Now this is where it gets a little bit complicated. What also happens when we're teleporting to 9 is we're triggering this trigger up here. Now this is what I like to call the link triggers. This is what is making everything possible. So basically when I hit that ninth channel, this triggered. So this option, trigger when receiving from 9, I guess I'll go over the whole thing really quickly. Trigger by players on, everything else is off. And it can only trigger once, which is good. And we want everything else to be disabled, and you can't see it in game. Now, what we want is it to trigger when receiving from 9 and when it's triggered, it transmits on channel 10. Now what happens is whatever this triggers on, you want this to be triggered by. So this was triggered by 9 and it transmits on channel 10. So we want this one to be triggered by 10 and transmit onto 11. Now the important thing, this is set up exactly like the 10 one, but the important thing here is I have a 1 second delay on it. You need the second to be, you need the delay to be 1 second because you only want to be there for a short period of time, hence is why it's a jump scare. It's supposed to pop up and then go away. And what this does is after receiving from channel 10, it will trigger on transmit. It will transmit on channel 11, and what that does is once it sees that, it will transmit back down to here where my original position was, lined up with the trigger. As you can see, I'm teleporting to channel 11. Thus, we're going to be in the exact same spot as I was before. So I guess I'll just show it again just to clarify. So again, I'm heading in the room. The trigger 9 is obviously right here, and you can't see it. So once I hit that, I'm going to be teleported to this separate room. But it looks like the same room. It looks like the same room, just looks like something's popping up. And once that happens, I'm going to trigger that other trigger, which is going to trigger the next trigger, which will then teleport me back down to my original position, looking something like this. So for the purpose of this demonstration, I actually did add a little sound effect that was triggered by channel 9. And you most likely want to if you're building a horror map that is going to be, you know, scary. You want to have some type of sound effect with your jump scare, but you can do a whole bunch of other stuff. You can have explosions, you can do this, you can do that. And well, speaking of explosions, that's actually going to be our next example. So let's go ahead and show that right now. So as I just mentioned, our 7th example is going to be explosions and triggers. Now let's say you're building a horror map and you want something to disappear in front of your face as soon as you approach it. Well, you can actually do that if you have this set up. As you can see, as I walk toward this guy, he completely disappears from my line of sight. And that is, of course, done with explosions and triggers. So let's take a look at how this is actually done. So with our trigger setup, we want it to be set up the same way as we had it with our first example, with the only being able to trigger it once. You can't see anything, can't hear anything. And we want its obviously corresponding channel to be with the explosive device. That's what we're going to be working with to make this happen. So if we can go back here, this has a ton of settings that are pretty important to be lined up with. But basically, here we're looking at it. The health doesn't really matter. And we don't want to display damage numbers because that will be able to indicate where it is. I made the blast radius as small as possible, even though really it doesn't matter. Depending on the size of the object you want to blow up, you don't want to change your blast radius. I didn't have it do any player damage, even though you can. And I have ignored team damage, of course. Now the structure damage is obviously going to correspond with the item you're exploding. So if you have a wall with 800 hit points, you want to have this at 1,000. But for the gnome, it has a pretty few amount of hit points, so I just put it at 450. We want it to damage indestructible buildings, especially if you're playing a horror map where you can't break anything, like my Endless Inception series or something like that. You want it to damage indestructible buildings. I turn knockback off, but again, if you're like close to it, you can have it knock you back if you want to. So blast line of sight no is gonna be okay for this. You want this off, and none for all the proximity stuff. We don't want it to detonate from game start, and we don't want it to play any of the audio/visual effects. If range of visualization is off and it's visible, it's not visible during game, these are fine to have on because it won't happen. So we want collide during games off, and it's fine if it collides with everything because it's not going to be important if we can't collide with it or not. We don't want it to show its health bar, and if you have this set to no, none of this other stuff matters. But if we head down to play audio, we want that to be off, and obviously we want our channel, we want it to explode when receiving from our corresponding channel, which we have to run past, which is 12, obviously. So that is explosion with triggers. Now let's get into our next example. Looking at example 8, we're looking at explosions and damage with triggers. So let's say you find yourself without a weapon again, and again, the objective is to hit the gnome in the face. Thank you. I gotta give a special shout out to the gnomes for being super helpful in this video because they're in almost every single example. But let's say you and after you hit him, you want him to disappear. You want him to act like you completely defeated him. So if we head up to the gnome and we actually give him a good whack, he will disappear as if you completely erased him off the face of the earth. So yeah, let's take a look at how this is done. Fortunately, example 8 is super simple. You just want the same setup for all the other damages. You just want it to be able to take damage while it's invisible, and you want it linked up on a certain channel. And when you do that, you only want to be able to trigger it once. But when you do that, it's the exact same setup for this that we just went over. Behind it, I have the same settings for everything. And once you do that, it will actually make the gnome disappear, or whatever item you want to disappear. If you hit a wall, you can make the wall disappear. It'll work with whatever item you want. So anyway, on to the next example. So for our 9th example, we're looking at using triggers and displaying dialogue. Now let's say you're doing the same thing as you were earlier in the example. You want to hit the gnome in the head. But let's say you want to give the player a notification that they had a good shot, they had a nice shot. Well, if I have this set up here, if I actually hit the gnome in the face, I'll get a display on the screen that says nice shot. Now, you could probably have them explode so that you can't have it set up again, but for now, let's just take a look at how this works. Again, this uses the same setup as our 8th example here with the trigger for the explosion, except this time we have a dialog message. Again, you could combine this so he explodes and a dialog message is displayed, but for this, I'm using the HUD message device. Now, this one has quite a few options as well, so we'll just go through all of them. I have my message. Obviously, it doesn't have to be nice shot for you. You can do it whatever you want, but we want the time from round start to be off, and obviously you can display a certain team, so you can have team 1 gets a certain message, team 2 gets a certain message. You just have to have multiple HUD devices, but I have it for all for the purpose of this. Time from round start off. If you have this to 1 second, it will play it 1 second after the round starts. So have this off. Display time, whatever you want it to be. If you want it to show nice shot for 10 seconds, usually I try to put the time estimating how long it will take the player to read whatever's on the screen. So for this, I have 2 seconds. I figure that's enough time. Your text style can be whatever you want. Just keep in mind that the more text you have, if you have extra large text, you're not going to be able to fit as much as if you just had small or default. Message priority, this will have priority over other messages. So if you have one set to critical, one set to normal, the critical one will play first. Play sound is none, but you have a bunch of different play sounds you can play with. And I place this at the top center, but bottom center and center right are also options. Don't want this to be visible during games, and obviously you want the channels to be linked up. So for here, I have this on 14, show and receiving 14, and when you hit this guy, it will activate on channel 14. So I guess we are at our last example for this video. So looking at our last example here, we're going to be looking at triggers with item granting. So let's say you're on your last gnome of your shooting course, your edit course, your obstacle course. And let's say for this example, I actually have a currency system. So when I hit this gnome in the exact spot, I'm going to have it take my weapon away, and I'm going to be granted with a coin, as you can see right there. So let's get into how I did this. So for this final example, you want to have the same setup as 14 and 13 for your triggers. So if you're not sure what that is, just go back and check them out. But this time we're looking at the item granter. Now the item granter, again, has a lot of options. So I'll do my best to try to explain what they all do. So we want to enable this on game start. Of course, if you don't, you won't be able to get the item. Receiving players, you can have this be the triggering player, the triggering team, any team. For this, I have it all because there's no other teams on this. Now, I have clear inventory. You can have keep all, and you can have like clear your resources, clear your items. But for this, I have clear inventory. That's the reason I got rid of my gun. If you want them to keep your gun, obviously you're going to have keep all on. Now, I only have one item in here. It's a coin. As you can see, I got ×1 coins when I shot it. But you can have it grant all the items or grant current items. It doesn't really matter if you only have one item, but you can throw multiple items in there. Now, if you do, there's actually this grant on cycle, and there's a bunch of these different options that you can, grant the next. Like if you have 5 items, you want to grant the 5th item, or you can just have them not equipped. Like this says, you have different options. You can always equip it, only equip it if you have empty slots, or only if there's space. So I have it always because it's just a coin. If we go to remove item on grant, it's not going, I have it set to no, so it's not going to remove this item once you grant it. So if I already had a coin, it's not going to remove my other coin. Give extra ammo. This is obviously for weapons if you're getting weapons for being granted. I'm not going to have this because I wasn't getting any weapons, I was getting coins. And cycle behavior can be, if you read at the bottom here, go ahead and pause the video, you can see what the stop and warp or wrap does. And then we want to get the item that we're granted once receiving from 15, and then we can have it cycle to the next item. So you have multiple items in here. Maybe you hit 15, and then it will cycle to the next item. So that's how you would cycle items theoretically. But we didn't need that. We were just using it for a currency system. So you can get a coin every time you shoot it. You can set your trigger actually to activate an infinite amount of times, and every time you shoot it, you will receive a coin. But yeah, that's all the examples I have for this video. So if you actually are a map creator and you create maps, you create horror maps, you create death runs or any of this, hopefully maybe you'll be able to use some of these in your maps. And if you're not a map creator, hopefully this video helps you understand some of the mechanics in other maps you have played. So yeah, anyway, guys, this has been Syntax, and later. Just kidding, you thought you could get rid of me. Hope you guys enjoyed that video, and I hope you enjoy the intro too. I just figured I'd try it out. You know, I made it myself, and I'm going to see if it works out, if people like it. But I wanted to, if you're still here, I wanted to mention that this creative template island sort of thing that I got going on here, this I want to be a community sort of thing. So basically every time you see a video where I'm doing something on this island, I want you to go in the comments and comment something you want me to build, preferably something small. But after every video, if I go into the comment sections, I'm going to see the thing that I like the most, and it's going to be in the next video where I'm on this island. So if you're like, oh, build bears having a tea party, if that's my favorite thing, then I'll go and I'll build bears having a tea party somewhere on this island. And basically, by the end of all the videos, if there is an end, there will just be a whole bunch of community creations or community ideas that I will have put into the island as just a way to kind of get us involved, you know, get you guys involved. So yeah, I'll just pick my favorite one or the most liked comment or whichever one I think is the coolest, and I will throw it on the island somewhere. I'll give you a cool shout out, and yeah, that'll be what this island is all about. I do plan on making plenty of videos on this island. I'm trying to do 2 or 3 times a week uploads on this channel. It's a lot to deal with, you know. I got online school going on and all that stuff. But yeah, if you were still watching, just comment something you want me to build on this island, and I will probably build it. So anyway, this time officially, it has been Syntax, and yeah, later.